Today we're covering The Hunger Games. Oh, oops. Red Rising by Pierce Brown. My bad. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lana, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Rob.
Hey Lana, and I'm excited to finish out this year reading a book, one of my favorite books that I've read in the recent years. And I'm kind of excited to see how you felt about this book and maybe see if the viewers will also love this book as much as I do.
It is a good book. Oddly, though, it's one that I feel like I have read before.
I'm not sure what you mean. But
what do you mean? What do I mean? I think I can show you what I mean. And if our viewers will bear with me, I actually thought, with your permission, of course, that I read an interesting paragraph I found online by a blog from Anaga of the New Centaura.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Let's shoot.
Okay, this might actually double as our summary of the book too, but you just let me know. I could be wrong. Okay, so this will just take a few minutes. I just read a YA novel, first in a trilogy, set in a dystopian future in a human civilization where the underprivileged, starving underclass from which the protagonist came from toils to serve the powerful governing caste that keeps the underclass in poverty and squalor with deceitful propaganda. All right, I think we're on the right path. The society they live in is so authoritarian that it outlaws an innocuous-sounding protest song that features imagery of death. The protagonist is a person who is very proficient in a valuable skill in the community that can help put food on the table, and the story kicks off with the protagonist trespassing into a restricted area with a love interest. Okay, I got a little bit more. A female character dear to the protagonist then catches the unwanted attention of the governing class, and that leads to the protagonist volunteering to participate in an institution important to the workings of their society. An institution which will test the protagonist's wits and survival abilities to their limits against other adolescents, requiring them to kill one another in a drawn-out game held in a massive wilderness area. Almost done. The protagonist is schooled by mentors on how to pretend to be someone the protagonist is not, in order to fulfill the governing class's expectations, and the protagonist excels and manages to impress everyone from the beginning. Making a good impression is important, as it will help the protagonist secure the patronage of members from the governing class, who are watching everything unfold and are able to provide boons to help the protagonist in the trials the protagonist is expected to face. There's a moment in which the protagonist let loose a projectile weapon aimed at the privileged observer's lofty perch. And in the course of the game, one of the protagonist's vulnerable female allies with a 3-letter name gets killed by other players in the game, and the protagonist performs a brief symbolic funeral ceremony for her. I could keep going, so I think I'm just actually going to stop and leave the last few sentences. But I thought that was an interesting overview.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. It's a bit vague, but I think it definitely summarizes the book.
Well, there's one more part, actually. Let me just give a few more. At one point, this love interest is camouflaged beneath dirt to evade capture by enemies. The protagonist later strikes an alliance with this new love interest, who then falls ill. The protagonist is able to heal this love interest's sickness with medicine the protagonist acquires from the people observing the game. I'll stop there. I know I said I'd stop earlier, but you know what's interesting, Rob?
Yeah.
This isn't from Red Rising. That overview was not from this book. Can you guess which overview that was from?
I suspect I might know. It's one of your favorite books.
It is. It's The Hunger Games. So, don't you find that a bit odd? I think The Hunger Games came out in 2009-ish, and this came out in 2014. Weird.
Let's call it parallel development.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? I should say The Hunger Games actually happens not in space. So, there's that.
Yeah. So, yes. So, this book definitely feels a lot more YA than almost any other book I've selected. Because it does take place, and the main characters are youths, 17, 18 or so, and they're basically put into an arena where they basically have to battle it out for the entertainment of others. And it very much has that YA kind of feel. You know, the existing society is utterly corrupt, you know, so, and these youths know how the world could be a better place. So it definitely has that YA or Hunger Games type of feel. And
it definitely has that Hunger Games type of feel, specifically. Almost exactly, actually. And it bothered me the entire time I was reading this, but I shouldn't let that like bog down the flow of the show. I know I'm going to bring up Hunger Games references because I can't help myself. But if we take that out of it, this is a good book. And I am still excited to talk about it because the differences in this book are actually like the good parts of it. Like it's pieces the Hunger Game was missing. Now there's definitely parts this book was missing that the Hunger Games was great at, and that's where I'll probably want to talk about comparisons.
So to talk a little bit more about Red Rising itself, this takes place in kind of the far future. Humans have now colonized the solar system, and through genetic engineering, they've actually physically changed humanity into a series of castes. And their caste is a color-based, so the main character is a red, and they're at the very bottom of this society, and there's many different colors until you get to gold, which is the top. And this genetic engineering changes people in tremendous ways. Like the reds, they're physically smaller than everyone else. They're pushing 5 foot tall. You know, their lifespan is only, they consider a very old person to be 40 years old. Whereas like a gold, they're pushing 6.5, 7 feet tall. Some are even bigger than that. And we encounter a couple in this book. And they live to 140 or even longer. 140 is their old age. So the genetic engineering of this is just pretty wild. And while this book doesn't show it, as the series progresses, you even get to meet many of the other colors. And they have even more unusual changes to them. Like some of them, they're almost robotic in the way they've been altered, almost in a Dune-like way, so that they can perform calculations and stuff all in their head and very rapidly. So this is a very kind of, and while we're joking about Hunger Games reference, the setting itself is quite a bit different. In fact, like we're talking a little bit about the Hunger Games where there's an arena and all the people are sent to their deaths. Well, instead of being the underclass who's sent into this arena, these are all basically the privileged rich kids. These are all gold people sent to cull out the crop of these gold youths so they can only have the best of the best to, keep down the underclasses.
And that's the part of this that's better than the Hunger Games in a way, because like the Hunger Games, I know most of us have probably seen it by now, takes from different districts ruled by the capital. So everybody there is pretty much there for the same purpose. They hate the capital, with the exception of maybe District 1 or 2. Whereas in this one, also, they didn't know they were going into some sort of fighting game. It's like most of them had no idea, with the exception of a few. So it's like in the Hunger Games, they know they're going in there. They know why. They know what they're up against. Most of them know there's propaganda. Where in this one, it's just like, actually, no, we're so greedy to make the very, very best of people that we want our very, very best of people to then fight it out so we can get like the best of the best of the best of the people, which is just crazy.
Yeah. And I think this is where I think this book really shines to me, is there's a trope and it's called school is murder. And we've talked about that, especially during Fourth Wing and, our just these general dark academia type of stories, where a lot of these books where they have these characters just kind of killing each other willy-nilly. I found that frustrating a little bit during Fourth Wing, because it was like, what was the purpose here? Like, why are they so brutal? Even after they get their dragons, they can still just murder each other, You could kill the best person, the person with the most useful power. They could just get killed, and the society is like, meh, they weren't the best, even though they had like a crazy useful power. Whereas I think this world really gets that right. That yes, there is killing in this, but the killing feels like it's serving a greater purpose. It actually seems like they're actually educating these people in a way that you don't get in those other stories. What do you think?
I don't know, why do we keep reading books like this though? Like we're going to get known as like the podcast that reads murdering kids. It's horrible. I don't even know that I can say that on YouTube. I had to like stop myself. Like, this is terrible. Like, we just keep doing this. But yes, I agree. Like, the Golds, they're meant to be this like military force, right? And they basically kind of rule space. They are in charge of the militaries and like the space fleets. So you have to be aggressive. You have to be like cunning in military skill to be able to do that. So yeah, I mean, the point of it makes sense, but it's just so very brutal.
Yeah.
And like, like medieval, the way it happens. But we haven't talked too much about the actual characters though. Like this, Hunger Games has Katniss, Red Rising has Darrow.
Yes. And Darrow he is a red. He's what's called a helldiver. He basically is a miner, which actually kind of is another Hunger Games allusion.
I didn't even have to say it.
And he kind of gets picked by the rebellion to infiltrate the Gold School for their elite killers. The whole goal is so that he can kind of gain power and access that Reds like himself would never have access to. So he really is that underdog. He has a completely different world experience than all of these other people. They all grew up basically being the cream of the crop, the best of the best, and knowing it. So they are all like just arrogant assholes. The whole lot of them. And he has to pretend to be one of them.
And this, like, his world, right? So he's underground, and they've actually, you talked about earlier how they've, like, genetically kind of mutated our species to adapt to the world. They're basically like moles in a way. Like, they're underground, they're tiny, they have white skin, their eyes are even red just because they don't have light, not natural light, and very little of the light that they have. And this is where we get some of those Hunger Game references too, which is they even can't sing this forbidden song. And so Darrow experiences loss very early at the beginning of this story, where he experiences loss of someone close to him, and this song is sung. But this is where we start getting some of this feeding of the propaganda that they are basically raised with, which is like one of the Golds comes down and, uses this kind of significant moment for Darrow as an example. And then they broadcast it on, televisions, and they heavily edit it. So we're starting to get the feeling of like, there's a lot of propaganda, something else is going on. They're being fed one story from the surface. They're all eating it up. They're all working for this harder cause because the Golds tell them that's the way it is. And yet some people know, or some people suspect that's not the way it is. And so that's where Darrow journeys on. And, after he gets past this early struggle, is taken in by a group who wants to, use him to help further the cause of kind of the rebels, so to speak.
Yeah. And what I think I really like about this is the whole use of that propaganda, because like when Darrow is trying to learn what it means to be a Gold, like they're telling him, okay, you're going to pretend to be a Gold. We're going to alter you so that you'll blend in, but you still have to act the part. And they're like, they don't blush at all. Like they're not afraid of their own nudity. The Golds are not trapped by vice or a lot of the frailties of other humans. They're basically peak perfect humans in every single way. And then when he enters this school, what they call the Institute, you really get to see, yeah, they're none of those things, at least when they're alone. When the Golds are just with each other, they're just as awful as everyone else, if not more so, because they have power.
Yeah, I noticed that too, like how they were teaching him to be a Gold once he actually got there. Like the differences between even though they were very connected. So this group that he came into contact with, they're on the surface, which, by the way, once he got out of the underground and got on the surface, he realized, oh, definitely all propaganda. There's like full on cities here, and there's like flying vehicles and like floating houses. This is nuts, right? So like, but even then, even though they were very informed of the golds, they still had their own like preconceived misconceptions. So they were still very more people-like than he thought once he got there. But I want to talk a bit about the process of him becoming a gold, because this was actually my favorite part of the story. Once we get to the Institute, actually I liked the Institute quite a bit. But once we got to this kind of battlegrounds that they had to go into, which we'll talk about later, that's when I started disliking the story a bit more, probably because that's when I made the connection of, holy shit, this is the Hunger Games, because before that I thought the story was going in a different direction. And so I read through this, I read that first half like crazy fast, because I was like, whoa, and I thought what they were prepping him for was different. But the whole process, right, this is where I was fascinated. Okay. So they get Darrow, they basically take him to this like not underground club, because it's above ground, but like underground in terms of like it's for the lesser color types. And they introduce him to a carver. Now, a carver is somebody who their profession is to adapt people, like surgically or however.
Yeah, like so like the Mickey, the carver, like he has these girls, and he's added wings to them so they look like angels. They're not even functional. They're just there to look cool. This is the kind of surface level vanity of this culture.
Yes. And people with 7 fingers and just like weird stuff because they need to be exotic. So there's also this subclass called pinks, which are basically like, like they do sexual, they're pleasers. They're people pleasers, basically. And they're there for the use of higher color classes, like sexually. And that's kind of sad, but also it seems like a lot of them generally don't mind, because they've been genetically altered to like that pleases them too. Like they accept it, but there's some of them don't, of course. But anyhow, so he walks into this like rave club. Like they even talk about the music bumping. So we go straight from under the ground, Red Rock. They're mining, they're poor, they don't have enough food. And they actually get more food by who can perform best, right? So actually similar to the Hunger Games there on their food rations. But then we immediately go from that to like club and like people with wings and like, oh my gosh. It was just like badoom, like big world change. So the world building in this was cool. But anyhow, that carver basically is tasked with making, Darrow, who's this tiny little guy, white skin, red eyes, red hair, turn into a gold, basically a god. That's how they look, like Greek god, like chiseled abs, right? We're getting our chiseled abs in our romantasy, which, I need. The golden hair, the golden eyes, just like an Adonis. And what I like about this is this doesn't happen overnight. This takes many months. And in order to get his muscles ready, they put him in a machine that basically like uses the contractions to build your muscles. You can run in it. This is where some of the character building, I think, was at its best. Because the people who attended to Darrow, we had the carver, which is Mickey, Mateo, who basically taught him his manners and how to dress and how to act, which is Cinna, by the way, in Hunger Games, Rob.
Of course.
Harmony and Dancer, and even this pink who basically took care of him and like healed his wounds and made sure he slept and ate, like a nurse, so to speak. This was just beautiful. That world to me was where I could have stayed forever. And when he had to leave that world, I was sad because I liked the character so much.
Okay. Yeah. And for me, my favorite characters come in a little bit later in the book, after he arrives at the Institute. I specifically like his 2 closest friends over the course of the story, which is Cassius and Severo. Those 2 characters, and they could not be more different, despite the fact they are both golds, from this upper tier of society. Severo is actually seen as being one of the worst golds. Like, he is the lowest drafted player on his team. He was.
I love Severo.
And Cassius, it was basically one of the best. And between the two of them, you kind of get a good kind of spectrum of what it's meant to be a gold. And Severo specifically is probably one of my favorite characters throughout this whole series. He only gets wilder as the stories go. And now we're talking about a character who, like, dug his way into the belly of a horse to hide. Like, he, you know, Luke style. You know, he's hiding inside a dead horse. You know, he killed a wolf with his bare hands and basically wears it around and howls at the moon. He is just a wild character, and he's probably one of my favorite parts of this book series. Because he's
fantastic.
He always has his heart in the right place.
Yeah, and we should say, so we didn't really talk about this earlier, but this book's going to be hard to not do spoilers on. We've already done a generic plot, right, which is actually somewhat detailed, but we're leaving a ton out. So if you're watching this, doing our best to not have spoilers, but some of it's just going to be like, we might have to touch into it a bit. Severo, what I like about him is that he does come from this privileged group. He is a gold. They're all golds if they're in there. But there can be golds that are lower class golds. And so, but he's not that low that he's like considered like a bronzy or the other one. But he is still from a family that is probably not likely to ever be able to advance that much in their class system. So he kind of goes into this knowing that, like, okay, I'm never going to get higher than X. What do I care? Like, I'm just going to, like, run around this battlefield. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. It doesn't matter. I'm topped out at this level anyway. So who cares? And I think that, like, his don't give a shit attitude was the best part about that in terms of the characters in the latter half of the book. I didn't like most of the other characters. I didn't bond with them like I did in the beginning, but at least I had the one saving grace of Severo.
Yeah. Now, I talked a little bit about the school is murder trope, and the reason why I say this book is significantly different than something like Fourth Wing is, yes, the society wants these to all be killers. These are all supposed to be killers, so they make sure all of them are, you know, capable of fighting. But for the most part, while they don't punish it within the games, there's no law here except for the law that these children apply to one another. But when they get out, they're not exactly going to be rewarded for being awful to each other. They're not going to be rewarded for their worst sins. In fact, you might have made lifelong enemies with other powerful people. So there is a bit of checks and balances there that you don't get with something like Fourth Wing, where it's like, where certain characters are almost like smiled upon for with their homicidal psychopath tendencies. In this one, everyone kind of looks down. They might not be able to deal with it at the moment, but they look down upon people who are just the worst, you know, that are killing and doing the worst things during the games when there's no apparent obvious punishment. But the society intentionally is going to punish them later. At least you'd hope so.
Yeah, that's all kind of like teased for the upcoming books, which I actually bought the upcoming books. I haven't read them, but I will read them. But like, this is where it's different than the Hunger Games, but like it's the same concept, right? So in the Hunger Games, you could have sponsors that can help you out in the battlefield. And also there's cameras everywhere. So very similar. So there's cameras everywhere. You can get aid. But in this one, the aid's kind of different. So there's like your mentors, the proctors in this, who have different houses. The houses are based off Greek gods like Mars, Apollo, Athena. And then different students are in different houses. So the almost Harry Potter-ish in that sense, but whereas the proctor gets a special gain if their group wins. But what I found interesting here, and like to kind of enforce your point on that, is that the people who can help them are just like different houses in the military, basically. And if you make a wrong move or the wrong step, all these people are watching you who are basically going to hire you after this. So once you leave the school, you're going to get a job somewhere. And the people watching these games aren't watching it for the amusement. Whereas like in Hunger Games, they might send something to a contestant because they want that contestant to win and they bet money on it. So it's like, it's just for their entertainment. Whereas this one sponsors or help that happens in the games is because like some military house outside of the games who wants to hire someone has a vested interest in this person succeeding. So that's actually quite different. So even though I did not, and I had a strong distaste for the cameras and like the help that would get aided in this because it felt too much like the Hunger Games, at least I thought the reasoning behind it was much better than the Hunger Games.
So just to kind of wrap up with our characters, we already talked about Darrow and Severo. Cassius, like I said, he is another kind of rich, pampered kid, and he's been trained, and he has this very different worldview. What other characters stood out to you?
Well, definitely like the ones that you could tell come from like big families, right? We have Cassius, he's just so very well trained, right? We have these golds, and you could tell some of them are super well trained and some of them weren't. I actually had a lot of unanswered questions from this section because there was they were alluding to like this person's bones seemed extra strong, or this person seemed like taller than they should be, or this person's eyes were even golder. And it kind of made me wonder if they're getting some of the same treatment that Darrow was getting, but he was getting that treatment to be like a gold. But in my mind, I thought the golds were already just that way. So I was just confused that some of them might be enhanced more so than even just being born gold were. So maybe we see that in other books. But outside of just like the physical side of these characters, I just really enjoyed the ones that, you know, you could tell understood the game. So there's a character named Mustang. She definitely understood the game. She understood the assignment, you know, as the youth is saying now. And like the military thinking and strategy behind all of this and the choices they make from these kind of like not upperclassmen, but they just seem so much older than Darrow because they've been raised in this world longer. I liked that, but I didn't like any of the characters. Really. Definitely didn't like Cassius. I think her name's Alejandra or one of those. It's like it starts with an A. I didn't like her either. I just didn't like most of them. Also, trigger warning in the book we should have brought up at the beginning is rape. There's tons of instances of rape, even though you don't read about it. They never go into it. So didn't love that. That happens a lot once you get into the games. But I think the thing that I struggled with the most with the characters once we got into the games is that I wanted to feel something when we lost characters because we lost a lot of them. And once I realized it Hunger Game paralleled, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this. I don't think I'm fully recovered from Rue from the Hunger Games, the sweet little 10-year-old girl that passes, you know, and she, you know, that is a big moment in that storyline. And I just didn't get that here. Every time someone passed, every time someone was gone, I realized the author did not connect me enough to the characters. I was not sad, not one time.
Now, I do think, though, that where this did a little bit different than some of the other books that we've read, like Hunger Games or Fourth Wing, is I think the characters, especially because there's only one point of view character, you really only get the world from Darrow's point of view. So if he didn't experience it or if he didn't understand it, like, you just don't know. But, like, there's a certain amount of physical and like PTSD type reaction you do get from these supposedly perfect people who are being bred to be war machines. And yet near a huge chunk of them, the first time they have to kill someone, they are deeply upset by it. Now, some of them, not so much. They might have enjoyed it a bit too much. But almost all of them have a very strong reaction to that level of violence. For many of them, it's the first time they've ever really experienced it in their lives. And now they finally are realizing, oh my gosh, I could die here. And you don't get that as much in some of the other ones because I think some of the other books that we've talked about, it's almost too casual. Maybe the main character reacts because they're a better person, but too many other characters just go along with it. And I think in this book, a lot more characters are more willing, are even if they have to try to hide it, like they're uncomfortable with the fact that they have to do this. They might like the violence part, the fighting part, and the getting glory because that's what they've been raised to do, but they're not exactly comfortable with the more negative sides of that violence. And it's not highlighted as much because you only have the one point of view character. But it's there. And once again, it's kind of showing that false propaganda that these are perfect, walking tanks.
Yeah. I mean, I get that side of it. I just missed for me. And it just was. We had all this really great writing, and even with a single character view, right? It's still Darrow's view. And these characters came to life in the early part of the book. We know Harmony has this disfiguring scar, and how she got it, right? It's not fully answered, but he knows that Dancer knows, which is his kind of mentor. And there's so much backstory on these characters. There's so much heart in the whole thing. And then it's just instantly gone. It's just gone once we get into the games. And that's, maybe he's in this, you're right. Maybe it's from his point of view. He's in this recovery mode. It is a bit PTSD, but even then he knows his mission. And he refers back to his mission a lot in this part. And he still understands. I don't think he's so far gone PTSD that he's not connected to it and remembering where he came from. So the loss of the emotion behind the characters was rough for me.
Yeah. And also Darrow he has flaws. He has a built-in flaw. He often thinks before acting when he's mad. He has this almost rage that does impact his even decision-making capability. Turns out he's a pretty good strategist, but he makes mistakes. Not as much in this book, but it does happen in this book because he just starts getting angry and seeing red, and he's like, "Oh no, I need to hurt some people that have wronged me."
Yeah. He's better than Katniss. I will say that. Okay? So the problem with the Hunger Games for me, in the movies particularly, not as bad the book. She was better in the book. But Katniss wasn't as lovable of a character. Not that Darrow's lovable. I definitely wouldn't say he's lovable. But I connected more with him. Sometimes Katniss gets whiny, especially with her love interest, kind of whining about it. And I just felt like her character was just almost not deserving of the role. She gets to be the Mockingjay. And sometimes I was like, why you? Whereas Darrow, it's very clear the entire time why him. It makes sense. The question actually gets asked in the very, very beginning when he goes with this group. Why me? And his mentor Dancer says, I have a feeling we've tried this before. So they've been down this road before, but he's like, I just feel like it's gonna be you. And never once does that compromise. I never questioned the main character, the protagonist, getting that role. So Darrow is strong. Darrow's a character you want to follow. I'm invested in him. I'm not necessarily emotionally connected with him, but I believe in him and I want him to succeed.
And he's not a perfect, Mary Stu type of protagonist where he's a chosen one and everything he does is awesome. He has failures in this book, some pretty spectacular failures. And that continues throughout this series where, it's a series of ups and downs. It's not a perfect, where the first time he tries to do something, it's always perfect. And I think even a lot of this chosen one type of trope, they forget that these are still supposed to be humans that have flaws and make mistakes. And this book doesn't have that issue. Now, one thing that we don't get to do very often in a sci-fi book is rate the map. So how about you show me the map?
I'm so excited to show you all the map. I should also say, if you're new because you're here for season 2, this is something we got to do a lot of in season 1. And a part of the show I never want to go away. So as long as we keep getting books with maps, we're going to talk about the map. So kick us off, Rob. What did you think about this map?
The map is a pretty solid kind of fantasy looking map. And that's because this takes place during this Hunger Games Institute school. It's set in the wilderness and there's all these castles, and each of these houses basically is put to war against the other houses. And so it kind of looks just like a stereotypical fantasy map. What do you think?
Well, I liked the map because we're in a fantasy novel. And so I actually kind of kept going back to it because we're not on our Earth. We're on Mars. Well, I've never been to Mars. So I was like, okay, I kind of want to understand what's going on here. And especially when I didn't quite realize how deep under the Earth's surface he was, I was like, where is he? And I kept like, and then when he got to go to the surface, I was like, okay, where is this? And I couldn't, the map was worthless. And so I didn't realize, well, I liked the map. I'm like, okay, cool. There's all these houses. And I thought they were talking about the different colors at first. And I'm like, why are the colors called House Apollo? Maybe Apollo represents red or pink, or, you know, that made sense. House Minerva, maybe that's the pinks, whatever. Like I couldn't figure it out. Well, it turns out, Rob, and I know you know this, but the map is only useful once you get past the Institute and you're basically in the battlegrounds. Yes. And so like, I wanted to like the map, but I kept thinking the map is useless, and I actually didn't know why. So from a map perspective, it's worthless when you want it until you realize why you need it, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense.
Yeah, I almost think this map would have been better served instead of being at the front of the book. This would have been the more unusual situation where maybe it gets buried either in the middle, maybe when the Institute starts, or maybe at the end of the book, because it is a bit confusing because it doesn't make any sense for the first half of this book, where none of the things on the picture even show up within the world as you get to experience it until much later. So I would agree it is a bit confusing. It's not as helpful for that first half. For the second half, you know, it gives some relative positions, but you know, it's not the most useful map as far as compared to many of the other ones we've experienced.
Yeah, this is tough. I just struggled. Yeah, it's fine. You know what? It gets a ton of bonus points for just being in a sci-fi book, period. But I think I would have loved to see something like maybe quick references to what current Earth looks like, because like it mentions that so actually something I found out, they kept calling Earth's moon Luna. And so I actually had to look it up. I'm like, wait, does our moon have a name? Yeah. So I Googled this. I'm like, what's the name of Earth's moon? Well, the name of Earth's moon, Rob, is Moon. It was discovered first, right? So they just called it a moon. So actually our moon never got a name. Other moons have names. So in this book, they've named our moon, and they've named it Luna. And it's basically a space station. It was the first terraformed place other than Earth, right? Like it was the first spot. So this is basically where it's like the center of operations for the Golds, at least the military. And it's so covered and surfaced now with giant tall buildings that I can't remember how they referenced it in the book, but the moon's new surface area or diameter is huge now. So I don't know. I think maybe we could have had a page like Luna today, or like the Earth today, and then maybe like a view of like subterranean level Mars. I think that would have been much more helpful.
Yeah, I think you probably could have had a map for the very first part of this book and then a different one for the later part. Now, some of the other stuff like Loon and the different planets, because functionally almost all the planets have been colonized at this point in the story, even way out into the gas giants. A couple of the characters in the games are from the outer rim, the outer planets. So it's so you do get the experience that, but it's later in the book. You know, a lot of the backstories for these characters do get expanded upon as the book series goes, but for the most part, you can only really review the book so far as you've read it, which is the very first novel. And you know, I think there's enough here that you are able to understand the setting, but there's enough room for growth later on. It's just not, you don't get buried in exposition. I think that would have been an easy thing to have fallen into, would have been to give a whole bunch of exposition about what is life like on Loon? What is life like out in the Jovian moons? You could have easily bogged down the reader with a bunch of stuff that doesn't actually pertain to this story. And I'm glad the book skipped over that. It's hinted at it, let you know it's out there, but didn't talk about things that don't pertain to this story. And I think
The
Expanse
Expanse
well.
was good at that too. Right? Like The Expanse, we actually go back to Earth at one point. We know a bit about Mars and the moons, but Expanse doesn't go too far into it, which was great. But maybe this book could have had a little bit more, but I agree. It wasn't relevant to the story. But it made me Google something. I'm like, what's the name of our moon? Uh-oh, I know I should know this. This was like a third grader thing. But yeah, if I had to rate the map, I would have to give it a 2. Just because it wasn't helpful to me. I'm super excited that it's in a sci-fi book. But yeah, it wasn't that helpful. Even towards the battle scenes, like knowing where the castles were was just kind of like, eh. I'd already discarded it in my brain as like this map wasn't helpful by the time I realized what it was helpful for.
And there's a few other scenes from that are referenced in the book, like locations, like there's some watchtowers, there's some houses out in the wilderness, there's some locks, lakes, and they're not on the map. So in the story, there's actually a map on the wall inside each castle, and it shows you where your castle is and where other castles are. And through technology, it actually changes as the house explores the world. And that's what this map is. It's the wall. Because you actually see, here's the houses they discovered, here's some houses we suspect are down there, but you don't know whose house it is. It is literally just a picture of that wall for a later portion of the game. And, it's kind of cool that it's almost in setting, but not. And then that wall doesn't have things like little lakes and houses and little watchtowers. It's not on the map because the map doesn't care. It's more focused on the house-to-house warfare. And so I think that's what the map is it's really just the map from the wall.
Useless. Not kidding. What would you rate it?
I'm going to agree. I'm going to say it's a 2. I actually like the map. I think it looks good, but it's not the most helpful.
You know what we also get in this book that we haven't had to cover in a while?
No, what's that?
Crossbows.
Yes.
Yeah, so we used to have a section where we would rate the map, and we did this a lot more in the first season because, we just had more crossbows. But so we named ourselves Reading Crossbow because we're like, I don't know why. It's a silly name, but it works. But yeah, we actually had crossbows in this book. No giant significant meaning other than the fact that like different houses were kind of given sort of a gift, so to speak. And so like some houses ended up having grain, other houses had a water source. I can't remember what some of the other ones had, but each house kind of had a thing.
One had horses.
Yeah, one had horses.
Much earlier on than everyone else.
Yep. And so they had like weapons stashes. So you could also kind of find like locked boxes. And actually in the beginning of this book too, they had almost like the cornucopia where they had the weapons in the center, but it wasn't weapons, it was food. And everybody like ran to it, and people could try to kill you. It wasn't as dramatic as the Hunger Games, but like, so they found crossbows. And so that was interesting, but yeah.
So a sci-fi book that has both maps and crossbows. Unexpected.
Yeah. On Mars.
On Mars. All right. So.
Oh my gosh.
I guess let's review this book. It's a very different book, though it felt familiar.
Very. Yeah.
So what do you think?
I'm. It's tough for me, Rob. I'm not gonna lie on that. Like it's tough for me. Like I said, I loved the beginning of the book before I realized it was straight up Hunger Games. And someone said it's Hunger Games in space. And I think I even said that like 2 or 3 episodes ago. Like I'm like, I heard it's Hunger Games in space. Oh, I think this was on our books that are on our TBR. And I'm like, well, I'd love to read a Hunger Games in space, but I just thought it would be so different. In my mind, once I realized it was Hunger Games in that battlefield, I actually pictured the battlefield, and I couldn't get this out of my head despite the map. I pictured it like the second Hunger Games movie where it's the different clocks. And I felt like they were in different zones. Even though I knew they weren't, but my head was stuck. And that could just because I love this series so much. I recently, read the prequel to the Hunger Games. I have the other one pre-ordered for it's like basically Hamage's story. And I just love that series so much. I actually think it was written better. The characters are better, minus Darrow being better than Katniss. And the overall like story building was just much better. Now, having that said, I did go down the Goodreads and reviews and blog, rabbit hole, which is how I found that paragraph at the beginning of the episode. And I've read that where this succeeds is where Hunger Games failed. So Hunger Games, I was displeased. Like the second book is my least favorite. They go into the Hunger Games again. How unoriginal. You wrote the same book twice, right? So this doesn't do that. Now I haven't read them, so I actually don't know. But we actually get what I want. Okay, so from the first book, I wanted Darrow, the main character, or sorry, the first half, to be a rebel, to take down the big guys, to upset this class system, to basically get rid of slavery. And I feel like we just took a little path down the side for him to go through this institute and go through this test. And once that's over, he gets back on his mission. So if that's true, then I cannot wait for the second one, because Hunger Games failed in that.
Yeah, and just a tiny spoiler for the second book. The second book starts off and he's at the space academy, where they learn how to command spaceships. And I was like, oh my gosh, are they going to Hunger Games this where they do the same story a second time? And I almost panicked when I first read that. And then I was like, and then it's over. Like a chapter later, it's over, and it's going more in almost a politics. Like there's a whole political story that happens for a while, and then you have a full on Civil War story, and then there's a Spartacus in space story, and it doesn't really repeat itself, especially within that first trilogy of books, which is my favorite part of the book series. Is the first trilogy tells a very single, cohesive story, and it doesn't fall into a lot of those traps.
That would be great, because I know I need to rate it. So I will rate it by saying The Hunger Games for me is a 5. I love that book series. She's adding to it, and every time I read a new book, I'm like, I love this series. It's a 5. I'm so invested. A Song of Ballad and Snakes is a beautiful story, and I can't believe she was able to add to it. So that's a 5. Had Hunger Games not come out, and I'd never read that, this I think would be a 5. It's compelling. It's interesting. I just have read it before in so much detail. Even the med techs, that little ships that come down and take away the dead bodies, same thing. It's all, Rob, it is such a fucking copycat. I can't take it. I can't. It hurts my brain. I do. Some people say he didn't directly copy. I think he did. And I'm disappointed. I'm incredibly disappointed that the book went there. So, but that's not fair, right? Because I said if Hunger Games didn't exist, it'd be a 5. But that's because I think it stole. So it is I'll be nice and give it a 3.
Okay. So now I have a little bit of, I guess, insight through friends about how publishing works. And I suspect, because you might not, or you might realize this is actually Pierce Brown's first novel. And he's now written 6 in the series.
Yeah.
And I suspect, just from what I understand, the way publishing works is this was selected to be published because of the similarities. That's the way publishing tends to work is whatever's popular right now, they basically start asking around and say, give me more of that. That's why you get these waves of like vampire stories and zombie shadow daddies and vampire and the zombie love story and all sorts of these, and they come in waves. And I suspect that when the Hunger Games books were coming out, they were publishers were shopping around for something that was similar but new. And that's probably how this got picked up. That's a guess on my part. I don't actually know anything about.
I would agree. When you go to Google like Fourth Wings or something, people are typing in, and this is on Reddit too, I want a book like Fourth Wing. I love Fourth Wing. What's next? What can I read in this? I want to gobble it up. And so even searching Reddit for Red Rising, you start to see threads where it's like, I love the Hunger Games. What's a book like that? So no, not shocked at all. And that makes total sense to me.
Now, and I would absolutely say, but though, when you go into after this book, it is a very different story. It doesn't tread the same paths. Essentially Darrow Darrow doesn't lead a rebellion like a Spartacus-like rebellion. The whole premise is he actually gets golds to back him. He shatters their society as this book series goes. And like I said, and it goes in unexpected ways. And he still has way more setbacks ahead. One of my favorite moments in this book is the first time Helldivers go to war. And it's just a great scene. It's probably one of my favorite scenes in the book. Or when you get other supporting characters like Ragnar. Ragnar is an Obsidian, one of the ones that's referenced but not actually talked about in this book because they're not in this book. But Ragnar, their whole culture is based on like Norse mythology, and his character is just a blast. And so I would say if that's your biggest hang up, I'd say you'll definitely be more satisfied as the later books as you read more. The second,
and I will.
The second series is a little bit different because they add more point of view characters. So the first 3 books is just Darrow. The next 3 books, they have more point of view characters and they expand the world a lot more. And it's a tone change that took me a little bit to get used to. But if I had to rate just this book, I found this book fun. I found it exciting. I found there's several moments where I kind of choked up a bit, especially in the first reading, because I really just thought it was heartbreaking.
When?
The passage. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you had an emotional connection. Sorry to interrupt, but I just I didn't at all. So the fact that you did, I was like, interesting. Okay.
So,
okay.
And EO's story. And,
I
thought a lot of that was very tragic. I think there's a lot of tragedy in this story. And I like that in a heroic story. So I'm going to go with a 4. This isn't my top book, but it is one of my favorite series.
It is a good book. And one of the first times I think I've ever said 3. Cannot wait to read the next ones. I mean, that should tell you something, because I do think it was great. I really couldn't put it down, especially in the beginning. EO's story is brilliant. The whole setup is brilliant. The world's fantastic. For a first book, which I did not know that it was, how amazing is that? So I really like it. And I think I will probably end up loving the trilogy as a whole. And it's okay for trilogies to have the book that wasn't as good. It's just unusual for it to be the first one.
So I guess let's preview January. We have some new book picks. What's your pick for January?
All right, so my book is called 5 Broken Blades by Mai Corland, and I don't know too much about them other than there, I guess, is a corrupt king, and there's 5 blades or somewhat assassins that need to take him down. And they all have different stories. They're all different versions of a badass, I'm assuming. And between these 5 blades, the king must die. So, yes, this doesn't seem like anything I would ever pick. This is not romantasy. This is not dark academia, unfortunately, but we've had a lot of... There's no dragons! There's no dragons. But this is, I think... I don't even know where the setting is, but the way the blades look on the book, I think it might be like samurai. So maybe this is like a... Asian or Eastern inspired story. So not sure. This was continually fed to me on my Amazon feed as like, you should buy this. You should buy this.
Yes.
And so finally I'm just like, that's a pretty cover. Okay. So yeah. That's why. That's
I think it even has because I think I got the same ads from Amazon. Amazon pushed this one pretty hard. And I felt that way about my pick as well for January. I think after reading a lot of our recent books for the past few year, this one started showing up and even as I walked around bookstores, I started spotting this one a lot more. And it was almost like an earworm where I was like, finally I was like, okay, what is this book? Because I just keep seeing it everywhere I go. It shows up on ads, and it's called Scythe by Neil Shusterman. And this looks, I'm not sure if this is fantasy or sci-fi, but the just from a high level, it looks like maybe there's a society and everyone is functionally immortal, like they maybe don't age anymore, and they need a class of people to basically, finish people off, when their time comes. So they're basically, the Scythes are using the trope of a, Grim Reaper. Basically, they're the ones that go and execute people when it's their time. And something about that just seems pretty cool. It seems, the book itself, not only was it just pushed, but it seems like it's won some awards. I've tried to stay away from spoilers on this one, but this seems like a popular book that's being pushed pretty hard. So I picked mine for much the same reason you did. Advertising.
Yeah. So I think I know something you don't know, which is rare. And that is that this is YA, very much YA. And it's written from teenagers' perspectives. I bought this for my 13-year-old little girl, Rob. So
No.
it's not just YA. It's like apparently supposed to be safe YA, because I didn't want her to have any books with sex in it. So I looked this up and tried to find like a safe YA for young teenage girls, Rob. And then this came up. So we're switching. I picked Five Broken Blades. And even though this is about like, I don't know, death, murder, or size, it's for little girls.
So maybe we should just tell everyone we picked books for each other.
Okay. Well, that's good, because I cannot wait to read this. Because when I was in Barnes and Noble, like reading inside covers with my kid, and we were trying to find a book for her, because she just finished the Divergent series, and so she was like, I want dystopian. I love this right now. And so we went through and we talked to them, and they actually pointed us in the direction of Scythe. And I read the cover. I'm like, hey, if you don't read this, I'm gonna read this. So I'm stoked about it. I actually can't wait to read it. And we could use a little bit more like youthful perspective, I think.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make you feel good.
We will see who chose well in January.
We shall see. Okay, you guys, we have a little bit of a dilemma we need solved on this episode. We have a lot of you that are starting to watch our episodes. Thank you so much. Actually, way more than normal. Our viewership has gone up a lot. But no subscribers yet, and we're not complaining. We know you love our videos. You keep coming back week to week. Thank you so much. If you can, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. We might actually be able to make partner this year if our views keep going the way they're going, but we cannot do it until we hit 500 subscribers. So help us out, hit that button, and yes, do it.
Thank you.